Sundance Film Festival has always been an event I dreamed of attending the moment I became a movie lover. And after this amazing week of vacation, I can now say I finally accomplished that dream. After my first year, I have learned a lot when it comes to adjusting to weather, since Utah is really cold compared to California. I've learned scheduling because there's just tons of movies playing 2 weeks straight at 3 different locations, and an overall knowledge of how to get the most out of a film festival. Within that time, I was able to see 19 movies, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but before we get into that, I want to cover the movies that attracted the most buzz that's not going to make it on this list because, well, I didn't see them. Now, first one I have to mention is Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, Little Monsters, Blinded by the Light, The Report, After the Wedding, which I stupidly missed my screening for, Late Night, and The Farewell. All of these movies aren't going to be on this list, so if you wanted to hear my opinion on those movies, I apologize. You're not going to be able to receive it. But I encourage you to stick around as I talk about the movies I did watch at Sundance, because you never know if you'll find some of your favorite movies that will be coming out soon, and some that should be on your radar, or some that you should skip entirely. There are some bad ones on here, trust me. Also, a quick disclaimer, because I forgot to record this while making this video, is that there's seriously no trailers out for any of these Sundance movies, so what you're gonna see is either just the interviews of said movie or just random clips of just random shit. That's gonna be the entirety of this video. Alright, so the first on the list is The Death of Dick Long from director Daniel Scheinert, who also directed Swiss Army Man back in 2016. It's a story about 2 friends who put themselves in a dire situation of covering up the death of their friend Richard. Unfortunately for these 2 friends, they live in a small town in Alabama where the police aren't given that much to do, causing their lie to be discovered inch by inch, and their paranoia to be heightened. If you've seen any of the Daniel short films or even Swiss Army Man, you know their style always crosses between art house and absurdist comedy. Dick Long instead tells a straightforward narrative and enters the realm of a dark comedy, mainly having to do with the 2 main guys dealing with the situation they put themselves in. This may seem like your average dark comedy, but once a particular twist happens, which is absolutely crazy, you almost feel bad for laughing at it, that's when the movie takes off. Even before it gets to the twist, it balances out the point of view of these 2 friends dealing with the situation in a comedic manner, and going back to how the police are investigating the death of Richard. It's all equally funny. I recommend seeing this when you get the chance. Next on the list is Adam, from trans director Rhys Ernst. If I mispronounced your name, I'm really sorry. Which you may have recognized his work from She Gone Rogue and the doc series This Is Me. Adam follows a young teenager who spends a summer living with his older sister in New York City, who is hugely involved in the trans and lesbian scene, but eventually meets a girl whom he falls in love with, and she believes that Adam is a trans man. Adam continues with that lie, but tries to figure out a way to inform her that he is not trans. This was a pretty solid coming-of-age story, which I know there's a huge audience for out there. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of these types of stories, but they're at the least, heartwarming and genuinely funny in some scenes. I'm sure this movie will get buzz due to the director himself being trans and dealing with mostly a trans cast, which some will see as progressive due to the representation of the LGBTQ community. The beauty of this film is that it shows the humanity of this community and that essentially we're all the same people. I genuinely like this movie, so from what I told you, if that's something you'd be interested in, check this out when you can. So next up is The Nightingale from director Jennifer Kent, who directed The Babadook back in 2014. I don't want to give too much of the plot away because it's something that you should experience fresh going in. Before watching this movie, I was hearing buzz on how brutal this movie was, how people ran out crying, some passed out, so bad to the point where future screenings had to check IDs and had ambulances waiting for the audience. Even during my screening, like true story, a man had a seizure midway during the movie. The movie had to stop and help came rushing in, and thankfully, the man was okay. We got to watch the rest of the movie. It's that brutal, guys. I would hold a trigger warning to this movie because there are scenes that are very hard to watch. All I can say is Jennifer Kent makes her best film to date, and Sam Claflin, one of the good guys of the Hunger Games, is one of the most despised villains I've ever seen in a movie. Seriously, you want this man to die. I highly recommend watching this movie, but be cautious of particular scenes. Don't say I didn't warn you. The next movie is Before You Know It, directed and starring Hannah Pearl Utt. It covers a story of 2 sisters struggling to keep their theater afloat due to their father's enormous passion for the art form, but soon they discover their mother, who they once thought was dead, is actually alive and doing well as a soap opera actress. So things get interesting as these 2 sisters try and reconnect with their mother. This movie tries a little too hard to be Lady Bird at certain parts of the movie, except Lady Bird pulls it off a lot better in its execution. Despite my tastes and based on what happens in the movie, unfortunately, I have to say this movie isn't meant for me. Not a whole lot of interesting stuff happens, and I'm not ashamed to say I kind of snoozed off in a couple scenes during the screening. This would be considered as a coming of age story, and the whole point of it is to show that it doesn't matter what age you have to be to discover who you truly are, which is a great message in my opinion, but again, execution. I would say skip this one entirely, but if this falls in the realms of your taste, then hey, feel free to check it out, then I don't care. Then we have Honey Boy from director Alma Harrell, who directed Bombay Beach and collaborated with Shia LaBeouf in his screenwriting debut, loosely covering the story of Shia's life growing up as a child actor and his relationship with his alcoholic father. Interestingly enough, when Shia wrote the screenplay to this movie, he was in rehab, and essentially this was therapy to him, which you'll see hints of based on how personal this film really is to him. Honey Boy jumps from the main character Otis's life from him being a child, played by Noah Jupe, and to an adult, played by Lucas Hedges, who absolutely nails the voice of Shia LaBeouf very well. But then you have Shia LaBeouf. Shia portrays his alcoholic father, and I'll say that if the Academy doesn't at least recognize him for his acting, they will be absolutely crazy, because this is his best role to date. There's both a hint of happiness and sorrow sprinkled throughout the movie, and after watching it, I can say I have a lot more respect for Shia than I previously had before. I love this movie from beginning to end. Put Honey Boy on your radar, there's a lot to love about it. The next movie I watched is Mope, the directorial debut of Lucas Hain that tells the true story of amateur porn stars Steve Driver and Tom Dong, where together, they rise up in the porn industry with hopes of being the next big thing. My buddy Art from Let Me Explain explained it perfectly by saying it's the disaster artist but for the porn industry, because it's literally beat for beat of that movie. And honestly, I wasn't a fan walking out of Mope, mainly for how it was presented. Looks like it was shot on a $700 DSLR camera, which I understand the decision based on how the director wanted to give that amateur feel and how the two main guys are literally the lowest of low when it comes to porn actors, hence where the term mope comes from. And according to the director, who is actually a mope himself before tackling this job, is an accurate portrayal of what these actors go through, which again, this is based off of a true story, and some of the stuff that happens, it's kind of hard to believe on what the main character Steve Driver is doing, and from that, it slowly turns into a psychological thriller. It gets pretty sloppy towards the end, but from what I told you, if this is something you would want to see, go see it when it gets released. I personally wasn't a fan. Next movie I watched is Big Time Adolescence from director Jason Orley, starring Pete Davidson and the greatest rapper who ever lived, Machine Gun Kelly. And it follows the story of this kid who, in a way, becomes a surrogate younger brother to his older sister's ex-boyfriend, played by Pete Davidson, as the kid slowly gets corrupted by his older brother's lifestyles. One of the more hyped up Sundance movies based on the talent involved, and I'm happy to say that this is one of my favorites of Sundance this year. The group I watched it with all agreed that this is this decade's Superbad. By far one of the best hangout movies of the year. Everybody from the cast, including Machine Gun Kelly, all of the 8 minutes that he was in, were all fantastic. All I can say, it's consistently funny from beginning to end. Go see this movie as soon as possible. The next movie I watched is Imaginary Order from director Deborah Eisenstand. I think I said that right. And sadly, this is my least favorite of the entire festival. Now, a lot of stuff happens within the movie, but to give a brief synopsis is the movie follows a suburban mother going through a midlife crisis. She essentially doesn't have too many friends, has trouble with her marriage and relationship with her daughter, and gets herself in a situation that could potentially change her life forever. It sounds pretty neat on paper, but the way that this movie executes everything ends up being pretty damn boring. I swear I was watching a remake of The Boy Next Door with Jennifer Lopez in it, with the extra ingredient of the midlife crisis trope. The one thing I took out is that the lead performance by Wendy McClendon-Covey was actually very good in the movie. She does a complete transformation as the movie progresses, but when it comes to the story, pacing, and everybody else's acting performances, it falls pretty flat. I don't recommend this movie at all, maybe when it gets released on Netflix, and if you do watch it, hopefully you enjoy it more than me. Then we have To the Stars, directed by Martha Stevens, and by far, this is the best film I've seen at Sundance Film Festival. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but I will say it's a coming-of-age story that's based during the 1950s or 60s, helping bring forth the old-school film vibe to it. The entire movie is done in black and white, which isn't really much of a gimmick just because of the time period it takes place in. Apparently there's a color version out there, and according to Martha Stevens, if this movie were to ever get a wider release, they would play a color version. But for me personally, I'll prefer the black and white just because of the authenticity it brings to the story it's trying to tell. Everything about the movie is drop dead gorgeous. The storytelling, the acting, score, the cinematography especially, it's easily the best of the entire festival. I recommend seeing this as soon as possible when it gets the wider release. Next up is Paradise Hills from director Alice Waddington, starring Emma Roberts, Isa Gonzalez, and Awkwafina. Best way I can describe this movie is a young adult adaptation of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with a sci-fi twist to it. Basically, a group of young women are put on this island where they have to follow a certain guy reliance on staying there, almost as if they're staying at an institution. Then this whole mystery builds up as to what exactly brought them there as they figure out ways to escape the island. Paradise Hills is a bit of a mixed bag for me. There are some moments of brilliance sprinkled throughout, but then there are other moments where I felt it was a bit too convenient when it came to the plot. Best part of the movie by far is the production design. The team behind that did an excellent job placing us in this sci-fi world where it blends nature and technology together. I really haven't seen anything like that before. If that's something that'll interest you, I highly recommend this movie, but as far as how I viewed it, I thought it was just okay, honestly. The next movie I saw is Greener Grass, which is the only movie I saw twice at Sundance, and it's one of the most bizarre experiences I've had at the festival, and possibly any movie ever. This movie is like a live-action Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, but imagine all the bizarre twists that happens within the series, where it creates this, happy yet bizarre world until all the horrifying stuff really happens, except that it doesn't happen in Greener Grass. I feel Greener Grass will be an extremely divisive movie amongst moviegoers and film buffs all around. You'll have some people thinking that it's the worst movie ever made, and some thinking it's possibly the greatest comedy ever made. I'm along the lines of thinking that it's in every way brilliant. There's a short film you can find on Vimeo where you can get an idea of what you're in for. If you're interested, I suggest watching that. Get an idea of what you're really in for. But for me personally, I highly recommend this movie. So the next movie is the Untitled Amazing Johnathon documentary from director Ben Berman. As said in the title, it's a documentary about the life of the famous magician Amazing Johnathon. But something happens towards midway during the movie that turns into something completely different. It's something I haven't necessarily heard of a documentary do before, mainly because I'm not too aware of documentary filmmaking to begin with, but go into this blind, it will completely subvert your expectations based on where it's going. I highly recommend this. Check this out when it gets released. Then we have Brittany Runs a Marathon from director Paul Downs Colaizzo. Basically covers the story of a woman who wants to take control of her life since she feels the need to make a change, and one of those changes is her training for a marathon in New York, and of course everything that happens that leads to this huge challenge in her life. This movie is without a doubt very enjoyable. It has a great and relatable message, but I feel it does something that we have already seen done before in movies. In no way does it take away from how the movie executes its script and acting performances from Jillian Bell, who was excellent in the movie by the way, and everybody else involved. If you're looking for a feel-good movie, you'll absolutely find it here. And extra points for having me tear up towards the end coming from someone who ran cross country. They nail a particular moment perfectly. Check this movie out when you can. Next movie we have is The Souvenir. Oh boy, would you look at this amazing artwork. This comes from director Joanna Hogg. Now this won a ton of jury awards at Sundance and was received extremely well by audiences attending to most of the screenings, but unfortunately, I thought this movie was boring as hell. It covers the story of a young woman who's attending film school and trying to make her film, while at the same time maintaining this relationship that seems to be getting in the way of that. I'm not saying this movie is all around bad. It does have some interesting moments whenever the movie talks about film school. Just go out there, you make your film, that whole message. It's just whenever the movie focuses on the couple that really drags it down for me. The whole point is them being lifeless and robotic, but that doesn't mean that it's entertaining to watch. I know a lot of you out there who will watch this is going to disagree with me, but yeah, this isn't my cup of tea. Then we have The Infiltrators from director Alex Rivera, and it's based off the true story of these kids who purposely get themselves detained at a recreational center, learn about the inmates' cases, and do whatever they can to get them out. I went to go see this based off the buzz it was getting during the festival, and overall I thought it was pretty decent. Definitely the standout aspect is how they blended the documentary style with the actual dramatic filmmaking. Whenever it took place outside of the recreational center, it was the footage of the real kids working to get some of these men and women out. Inside is where they got the actors and the actual filmmaking crew to create the tension and suspense, and it all blended very well. It was definitely informative based on an issue that's currently going on today. Wasn't super amazing or anything, but absolutely worth your time. Go see this when you can. Next up is The Last Black Man in San Francisco from director Joe Talbot, and it covers the story of two best friends who claim a house in which one believes his grandfather built back in the 1940s as they try to adjust the ever-changing city that appears to be moving too fast for them. Definitely one of my favorites of the festival, but I do give a warning that this movie may be considered really slow by some, but there's a lot going on in terms of plot. The main actors, Jimmy Fails and Jonathan Majors, both did a fantastic job carrying this movie, bringing forth comedy and a sense of tragedy in their friendship. Cinematography was also really good, but mainly the movie relies on these two leads, and I believe they knocked it out of the park. Go see this when you can. The next movie is my second favorite of Sundance, and that is We Are Little Zombies from director Makoto Nakahisa. And it covers a story of 4 orphan children who meet up at their parents' funerals, and they're on their quest for their own humanity. And plus, they form an extremely popular rock band. It's bizarre, right? I know, but it's awesome. The best way I can describe this movie is that it's like the Earthbound movie we never got, and now that we received it, I don't think anything will come close. The entire soundtrack feels like it came from an 80s NES game that never made it to the US. It pays extreme tribute to old school video games with that 8-bit score. It's like the director made this movie for me. You know how some movies tell their stories through chapters? We Are Little Zombies tells it through stages as if it's a video game where they have the 8-bit animations of the main characters. Lots of bizarre stuff happens in the movie, but it's by far the most original I've seen at Sundance. See this as soon as possible. The last one on the list is Koko-di Koko-da from director Johannes Nyholm. And this is a strange one to talk about since I don't want to give too much of the plot away once again, but it basically covers the story of this couple who go on vacation after experiencing a tragedy, but an encounter with a mysterious group of people causes them to be placed in this time loop that resets them in the same situation over and over. It seemed like a very promising horror movie from the very beginning, but once it gets into that time loop section, it honestly gets repetitive. I don't mind when movies do this, but when you're gonna do the whole time loop trope, be sure to make each outcome different. That's not the case with this movie, since not too much changes each turnaround. I get the metaphor and what the director is trying to say. According to the director, he experienced a past relationship that put him through a constant loop of depression. However, this movie isn't fun to watch. I would probably see this getting released on Netflix once it gets closer to the release, but I don't recommend it. Alright, so those are my recommendations of the movies I saw at Sundance Film Festival. I expect a couple of these movies to possibly reach my all-time favorites list, since a couple of Sundance movies have already done that before, such as Whiplash, so it won't be a surprise to me if movies like We Are Little Zombies or To the Stars make it on there. It's been an awesome experience, and I'm definitely coming back next year. It won't be my last film festival this year. I'm gonna do my absolute best to try and make it to TIFF towards the middle end of the year. No promises there, but I'll be back soon to talk about more recent releases. I'm also gonna try and set a schedule for the video releases, and that's basically all I have for you guys. Go out there and watch all the recommended Sundance movies. I hope you love them as much as I did, and I'll see you guys soon.